Happy Sabbath, everybody. I hope that we've had a good week, and it's a pleasure and a blessing to be here this Sabbath. Let's open with a word of prayer. Dear God, thank you for all that you do for us in our daily lives, the things that go unnoticed, the things that give us strength. And I praise you that each of us have managed to bring ourselves here today and to spend time with you, to spend time with each other. I ask that the Holy Spirit may be with us as you have promised. And I pray that we may grow together as a fellowship, closer to you and closer to each other. I ask for your blessing upon the discussion. I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. So today, I guess the next few months, it's my hope or intention to review some of the things that I've taught in the past, as we try to, as a movement, consolidate what it is we believe about the Sunday law, about why the Sunday law is what it is, why the Sunday law occurred when it did. And it will be me sharing my perspective about those things. But as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts as we try to make sense of what's happening at the end of the world together. And as we do that, feel free to put up your hand. And if I don't see your hand, then the coordinator will tell me. But please try to refrain from just shouting out because it may get distracting. So I took prayer meeting a few weeks ago now, and the topic of that prayer meeting at least started off with trying to identify collectively what the Sunday law waymark is about. So peeling away the layers of Ellen White's interpretation of the Sunday law and trying to think of it at a fundamental level or first principles level of what this waymark is, what it's designed to do, so we can try and identify characteristics to look for, and then look in Ellen White's history, look in our history, try to dig into the mind of Ellen White, why she had the perspective she did, and why the Millerites had their perspective that they did, and Adventism as a consequence. And one of the things that came out of that discussion was this theme being built around the rise and fall of nations. And so if we think about the great controversy as a whole and what it is that's going on between Satan and God, Satan and Jesus, and the universe, it's a story about kingdoms, about who has the right to rule this society that we have. And not only who has the right, what are the mechanisms by which that ruling party, if I can call it that, goes about ruling. And so when we look at the story of Revelation 17 through that lens, and we see these successive kingdoms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or Daniel 2, and the various other chapters that detail this story of kingdoms that rise and kingdoms that fall, we can quickly see that it's Satan going about a specific work to reach an endpoint to, if you want to say, battle against God. that's what Revelation 14 is about. It's this culmination of one side on this chessboard, Satan, bringing their kingdom to, we've used the term perfection, to now go to battle. And God is doing the same to a degree from their perspective. And so when we think about the Sunday law as a marker in this story, in this great controversy story, and think of it as Satan has now reached the point where they have a unit or an entity or a thing that is ready to go to battle for this last great conflict. Ellen White uses that terminology, the last great conflict. Then it gives us the opportunity to take a step back from looking at the Sunday law as, or this waymark that has been termed the Sunday law. If we just call it waymark for now, where kingdoms reach their final form. In Ellen White's thinking, in Ellen White's mind, the identification of this kingdom coming to power or this kingdom reaching its final form was that it now has the ability to do something that the previous kingdom didn't do. So it's the visible sign of this change. And so in her mind, because of the world she's living in, because of how she thinks, and everything that's happened in the Dark Ages, the papacy is the center of attention. It's the central focus of the Millerites, everything that the papacy does to God's people. And so the Sunday law becomes that marker for various reasons. The Sunday law becomes this marker that this kingdom has now risen to power, the seventh kingdom, the dragon, as we would find it called in the book of Revelation. And so our discussion a few weeks back was around, okay, if we take away the Sunday law as being the thing that is the marker for a kingdom to come to power, and we try to think more abstractly how kingdoms rise and fall, we, in the ICM and in the last time we spoke, saw why elections become important for this marker, the Sunday law marker. So that's the context of our study today. It's this rise and fall of nations. And I would like to use this opportunity to review at least what was in my mind the piece of evidence to look for within an election cycle, the role of the Republican Party. And so a few years back, in 2018, Elder Tess stood up and presented various studies related to the King of the North and their back and forth, or their duel against the King of the South. And so we may or may not all be familiar with this line that's on the screen now. But when she did that, we have to keep in mind what it is we're doing when we do line upon line. And so I guess that's the question to you. I'll ask various questions as we go along. When we do line upon line, like what's demonstrated here, or in any other circumstance, what is it that we're doing that you can name with other methodology terms or whatever? Nyasha, did you want to say something? Oh, I think she's unmuted by mistake. Okay, so yeah, when we do line upon line, like the following, where Elder Tess takes a certain line of history and brings it to our line, what are we doing? What's another way of saying line upon line? It's baked into our methodology, the terminology we use for our methodology. Natalie?
Courtesy, do you mean something as simple as history repeating, or is that not what you're looking for?
Even more simple than that. More
Um,
simple than that.
Is it compare, contrasting, maybe?
Okay. So both of those terms, and you're going to be like, duh, that's what he said. That's what he was talking about. Is parables. We're using parables. So line upon line, or as Natalie put it, repeat of history. As Debbie said, repeat of history, or as Debbie said, comparing and contrasting. That's all just parable teaching. That's using the technique that Jesus used to teach. And the reason that it is parable methodology is because you take a line of history, and that line of history that happened becomes a figure, what we would call a figure or an illustration or a symbol. So in this case, this first history year, where Elder Tess is going to talk about the Spanish Civil War and the rise of Germany in its war against Russia, that is a symbol or a figure that's going to be used to point to the spiritual, our history. So knowing that, what does William Miller teach us or demonstrate about how figures are used prophetically?
do you mean like they have more than one meaning?
Exactly. So this line of history that we have in Russia in World War II, or that piece of history, it will mean one thing, but it can have another meaning. So, as Natalie pointed out, one or more meanings. And by meanings, we mean illustrations or applications. So when we do that, knowing that this history can be looked at in different ways, what determines how we're going to look at that history, that piece of history? How do we know that this figure means this in this circumstance, or this figure means something else in a different circumstance? Because there has to be something that grounds us.
Do you mean like it's fitting your story line, your thread? It's I'm trying to think the word.
No, I'll rephrase what you said, but that's what I'm looking for. So you have this figure, and how you're going to use that figure is dependent on the theme of the study that you're doing. So Natalie worded it a bit differently, but I like the word theme. So the theme of your story, and when you go to this model or that we've been using lately of the past, the present, and the future, and you're trying to understand what's going to happen in the future, you pick up a theme. You want to understand something. And so this theme that you're wanting to understand that's going to happen in the future, you bring it back to your past history, and that's the lens at which you're going to look at your past history. So in this case, when Elder Tess goes through the history of Russia in World War II, in 2018, what's the theme that we care about? Do you arbitrarily pick a theme? Like, how do you go about finding a theme that you're interested in? Can you say, I want to study, you look around and you see flowers and you say, okay, yeah, fine. I'm going to put flowers here. And so that's what I'm going to study in number one. How do you go about finding a relevant theme for your number three? Simba, or Melania?
I think you look at the principle that connects the true story, these two stories that you are looking at. For instance, in this case, we are looking at that is World War II.
So before you even get to World War II, you don't even know about World War II yet.
All right. You just look at the principle of flower.
Yeah. Okay. So is that something that should concern us? Flowers. Why would we care about flowers?
I've got my hand up, so I'll just.
I know, Natalie. I saw your hand. I was just with Simba for a bit.
Was flower? I think we are looking at maybe let's say the plants.
Okay.
Maybe.
I guess my question is, should we even care about flowers? So Natalie, do you have an answer to that question?
I don't know. I don't know if I'm right. I think wouldn't we be looking at the flowers if there's flowers in the world, what's happening at the present moment?
So there's something about relevance. And so Natalie says your relevance is here, but we haven't even got to the present yet. Blessing? Simba, is your hand still up from before, or you have something more to add? Okay. Yeah, Blessing?
It's Charity, sorry.
Charity? Okay.
It's okay. So I was thinking, if I understand you correctly, if we give the example of the story of World War II, you only go there because you already have a full history or story in which you have seen a particular theme, and then you realize that there's similarities with the story of World War II, and then you're going to go there to look at that story as well.
So I'm going to reword what you said, what Simba said, and what Natalie said into the way I think of it. And then you can tell me what you think. So as a movement, as a student of prophecy, what you care about is prophecy. You care about what's going to happen at the end of the world. But to be safe, to know what's going to happen at the end of the world, God is going to tell you various things that are going to happen at the end of the world. And so there are several chapters in the Bible, several books in the Bible that do that. Two, more prominently than the others, Daniel and Revelation. So you have the book of Daniel, you have the book of Revelation, and so you're interested about what's going to happen at the end of the world. So you open up those books and you read through the various prophecies of what's going to happen. And in one of those prophecies, you come to Daniel chapter 11, verse 40. And it tells you a story of what's going to happen at the end of the world. Those prophecies about what's going to happen are going to be surrounded by very specific entities. So it's not going to talk about Zimbabwe, for instance. It's not going to talk about Japan. It's not going to talk about flowers. They're going to revolve around key players in the context of the Great Controversy. So now we're interested, because we've read Daniel 11, verse 40, in this story about the king of the north and the king of the south. So they have relevance because they're grounded in prophecy. They're not just arbitrary things that are happening in the world today. So we'll come back to what Natalie said about the present, but at least with regards to the future that we haven't seen yet, God gives us various clues about what we should be looking for
Curtis,
at first go. Yeah, Andres?
I don't know if you can see the chat. People are writing.
I'd prefer if you raise your hand and speak, because
Okay.
I can't see the, yeah. So
Perfect.
just for everyone writing in the chat, please raise your hand and speak. Because it's hard to follow the chat. So does to Simba, I'll ask Simba first. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Thanks, Curtis. Thanks.
Okay.
So sorry.
Mhm.
So from what you are saying is like we are saying God declares the end from the beginning.
Mm.
Is that
So
so?
God has prophesied, or let me not say God.
All right.
John and Daniel have prophesied something, that something's going to happen in the future at the end of the world. And they've told you what the relevant things are that are going to happen at the end of the world. They're relevant because they're connected to the great controversy. So different things are woes, are King of the North, King of the South, all these prophetic players. They've laid them out here. You don't know what any of that means, but you know that they're relevant with regards to the end of the world. They haven't told a story about Lamborghinis or Ferraris or football teams. They've told a specific story about key players because they're relevant to the great controversy. So they've picked out and identified what should be relevant for you with regards to prophecy. So flowers become irrelevant. They're just a waste of time if you're going to understand prophecy. And so you find your thing that you're interested in. Daniel 11 verse 40. And you read that, and you read that in Daniel 11 verse 40, the king of the north and the king of the south are going to go into conflict. So now we've found our theme that we're interested in. King of the north versus king of the south. The next step from doing that, you found your theme, is now when you go back to the past, because this is your future, you want to look to the past to see what that theme looks like, how has it happened throughout history, because of what Natalie said at the beginning, because you know history repeats. So in the past, you should be able to see this theme somewhere in history. So you go to number 1, which is your past, and Elder Tess goes to the past and she sees, hold on, Germany and Russia are going at it with each other. So I'm going to look at this history with this theme in mind. This story of Germany and Russia, and what's at the back of the movement's mind, what's in the movement's psyche when we think about Germany and Russia in World War II with regards to the King of the North. Who's the King of the North in that story? When we think of it in this way, if I'm stretching your minds back to 2018.
Germany, was it?
So Germany is, so we have Germany. But in the movement psyche, why is this even relevant? Why is Germany even relevant to us? Take your minds all the way back to 2018.
Because of the relationship with the papacy?
Mm-hmm. So we have Germany, and the only reason this is relevant for us at the time is because of a book, because of a story that we've been telling from 1989, which is the role that the papacy plays in shaping global affairs. And this is one of those prominent histories where the papacy comes into the story. So in this specific story, the papacy is the king of the north in our minds. And in this story, the king of the north wants what? Think back to Fatima.
King of the South dead.
The king of the north wants the king of the south dealt with. Simba or Melania, please don't forget to raise your hands. I can see your hands. It just makes it easier. But yeah, Simba or Melania.
It was already spoken. Natalie said it already.
Okay, sure. So if we're going to look at this history with that theme, our theme being King of the North versus King of the South, and in our minds, the King of the North is the papacy. You can read this history in this way, where the time of the end is where you have the Spanish Civil War and you have this story about that leads up to the King of the North or the King of the South being defeated at the end. When you think of any story that's being told, whether it's in a novel, whether it's in the Bible, whether it's in a movie, whatever story that you're reading or listening to, every story has a main character or the story's primary question or goal. So a good storyteller is going to define that story at the beginning in subtle ways or very explicitly, but they're going to define the central theme. What is the spine of that story? And that's going to be the story's main motive. And through that story, if we call this plot A, your main story, there are going to be various subplots. Plot B, plot C, with different characters, but all these smaller plots are subsets of this main overarching story. So a good storyteller will integrate these plots into this main story without taking the main spotlight off of plot A, your central theme or your central story. So your characters, your protagonists and your antagonists in your central plot may drift off into all these different side quests, but ultimately everything revolves around this major plot. If you are not careful, you can get lost in these side quests, these smaller plots, and think that they're your main story. These subplots are meant to add details to your main story, your spine, without taking your attention off them. But if you, as the reader or the viewer or whatever, aren't careful, these become your main story and you lose the central focus that the author is trying to give you. So when we read Daniel 11, verse 40 to 45, and we want to understand the Sunday law, this has its own story. This way of looking at this history has its own story, which is the King of the North versus the King of the South, because that's what we read in Daniel 11, verse 40. But if our theme is now the Sunday law, and that's our main story, then the King of the North and the King of the South become subplots or plot Bs. They're not insignificant, but they're not the focus. So if we want to correctly stay on track, then the King of the North needs to be understood from that perspective, what we would call as war on the Western Front, separate to the King of the South. So what we can do, if this is our thing that we're trying to understand, and we're standing here, in one story, Daniel 11, verse 40, King of the North versus King of the South is our main plot, but we want to understand the Sunday law. So this becomes secondary, and King of the North verse, I'm just going to say itself, if that's not technically correct, but for purposes of our conversation, against itself, because that's what the Sunday law is about, the King of the North going into the glorious land. Then when we go to number 1, we need to look at that history in a different way, through a different perspective. And that's what we said at the beginning about Miller's rules. We change perspective of the symbol that we're taking. Does that make sense? Why this history can be correct from a specific perspective, but as soon as our main plot or storyline changes, our theme changes, because now our theme is not King of the North versus King of the South. Our theme is now how the King of the North goes into the glorious land. We need to look at that history in a different way. Does that make sense? Is that clear? Why and how we do that?
Yeah, and I was just going to say, is that a bit like, yes, you can use one, but it's the way you use it and why you're using it, like you just mentioned. Because if you use it in like the old sense, like a threefold union, you bring that to 3, you're going to make mistakes. So you need to know how you're using it, what symbols you're using, and look in from 3 to 1.
Yeah, and so that's your theme. That's whatever theme that you're going to look at, as Atlee says, determines how you're going to look at the past or the history that you're interested in. So this history, if we just say, we call it Nazi Germany. In theme 1, King of the North is, I'll say, the papacy. But in theme 2, where you're going to look at that story differently, the King of the North against itself, that's where you need a different focus or a different lens to look at it. I don't know if it's blessing or charity, it just says blessing. So blessing or charity.
Yeah, so it's meant to be blessing only. She's here temporarily. So
Okay.
It's mainly me.
Okay.
I guess I have a question about what you just said. My question relates to the verse itself, because I want to
Mhm.
be sure I understand what you are saying and not saying. So the
Mhm.
verse or the verses, 9, 11, 40, 41, etc.,
Mhm.
are part of a continuous story around a certain geographical setting.
Mhm.
And the king at the south and the glorious land are both conquered by the north within the same military campaign, if I can say.
Mhm.
So what are you saying about splitting them into 2 themes?
So if I read verse 40 as part of this package, there's a military campaign that you see between the King of the North versus the King of the South. That's all you see there. Those are the details that you get from verse 40. That's not the story of the Sunday law. We know that. We know that the Sunday law comes into the picture of verse 41. And so in verse 41, you read this military campaign from the King of the North against the glorious land. So depending on what you're going to pick up as what you're going to study between these verses is going to determine your theme.
Okay.
So, yeah. So if now we want to understand the Sunday law, then your theme changes. That's what I'm saying essentially. Natalie.
So, like with your theme 2, when you look at Nazi Germany, you went and looked at who's the King of the North there in the sense the party. Because when you look at the Sunday Law 2024, it was about, you said, what did you write there? King of the North versus itself. So that's how you looked at the parties in Nazi Germany time, Hitler. Is that how you done it?
So I'll get to that. If you give me a few moments. So now we want to know how a country, we'll say, eats itself from within, because now that's what we're interested in. Number 3, we're interested in the King of the North going against the glorious land, which is an internal struggle, internal power struggle. That's our theme. So now when we go back, this is the future that we're interested in, the prophecy. And so if we go back to number 1, what we have to look for is instances where we see this entity rise to power and essentially take control of the country from within. It's fighting against itself. It's an internal power struggle within that nation. So what you do as a student of prophecy is you look for times when that's happened in history. And one of those instances is Nazi Germany. Andres?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I think I might have missed something, but how did you get to internal power struggle? Because I'm thinking from the verse itself, like from the perspective of that story, it doesn't look as an internal thing.
So this is specifically, I've jumped a few steps, but you're going to combine Daniel and you're going to combine Revelation, the book of Revelation. So when you read through, at least when I read through, the book of Revelation and chapters 13, 14, 17, you can pick that out, that this is something that's happening within that nation, specifically around why it's worded the way it is. Yeah.
Okay, so it's from you didn't do that right now, like you just
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So we go back to this history, and while I appreciate that I've done this study before, I just want to give a quick overview of what's happening in Germany. As people have said that they don't remember me doing this study. So as a bit of review, what makes Germany interesting for us? What makes it stand out as relevant with regards to what we see happening today? We know that Germany has been involved in World War I. They've just been defeated, and this nation is now being brought to its knees, and it's been asked to pay reparations for everything that they've done in World War I, and et cetera, et cetera. And this new form of government is set up, the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic works in a way where you have a president who has ultimate power over the nation, but underneath the president, you have a parliament for all intents and purposes. And this parliament, like the UK, has seats that you win as a party, but there's a chancellor that represents what would be, if you were to say, your prime minister. If you think of the model of France, France has a president, but it also has a prime minister. And at the time, the president is the one with the power, and then your chancellor reports into your president. So this is the system of government that exists in the Weimar Republic. And so as time goes on, and as it's setting up this form of government, this republic goes through what you would call its golden age, because everything is stable. And the stability that happens within the Weimar Republic is because your major parties that hold the seats in parliament are your center right, which is your DNVP, and your center left, I can't remember its name, but this is what we're interested in. So your center right party, they hold the most seats in parliament for a long time, and they keep the nation stable. They reject the rise of extremism for a long time, but cracks start forming. And later, years come in, and now they start losing seats in parliament. So from having a strong grip on government, they start losing seats, and that essentially brings us to the years that we're interested in, because this figure starts rising up. Hitler in 1928, 1929, and the year that we're interested in, 1933. So 1928 is prior to the Great Depression. Emma, your hand?
Just quickly, I don't want to divert from it too much, but how the Chancellor is voted in like we would see the President, is it? I don't have the vote, the people have elected the President and the Prime Minister, or just the Prime Minister, the Chancellor? Sorry, Chancellor, because you've got Chancellor and President.
The Chancellor is appointed by the President in practice.
Okay.
So, yeah. So this Chancellor is appointed by the President at the behest of the parties. So typically what would happen is your majority party would have someone that they're going to say, this person should be Chancellor, and the President appoints them. The President is not bound by that in practice, but more often than not, they follow those rules, that the party that has the most seats, their leader will be made Chancellor.
And how was the President chosen originally?
That's where the voting takes place for the President.
Okay, so the President's voted in, and then the parties
by the people. Mm-hmm.
By the people. The parties choose who they want to be their leader, and then the President appoints a Chancellor from their recommendations. Is it based?
Because these elections here that happen, those are also voted in by the people who's going to sit in Parliament, and a party will hold majority of the seats. Let's just say 60% of the seats. And the party will say, we want this person to lead our party within Parliament. That's this person here, the Chancellor.
So the President's part of that party as well?
No, the President is voted in by the people.
Not connected to a party?
Yeah, there's a presidential election.
So that could be anybody?
Yeah, that could be anybody.
Okay.
And then this President appoints a Chancellor that's going to have a certain amount of power over the Parliament.
Right. Thanks.
The Chancellor that is appointed typically is from the party that has the most seats within Parliament.
Right. Yeah, majority. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Natalie?
Okay, so isn't that just like J.D. Vance being chosen by Trump? Because he was put forth by others to Trump.
Kind of, but not exactly. Why I say kind of is because clearly America doesn't have a parliamentary representative government in the same way. There is a bit of overlap. A more fitting model, I think, is how France operates, where you have a prime minister over here and a president over here, and then you have parliament, essentially.
Does France have a president?
Yeah, France has a president, and you don't see them a lot. You hear a lot more about the prime minister, but France has a president.
Who's the current president in France?
Macron.
Macron.
So that's Macron, and then Macron will appoint various prime ministers. I don't know off the top of my head. Someone can help. Yeah.
Minister. Thank you.
No worries. So, coming back to what's happening. So, the DNVP are your major party, but in 1928, they suffer a big defeat. And these radicals are coming up, taking a lot of the share of parliament. And then 1929 happens, and you're going to have an economic collapse, the Great Depression, which is, when you look throughout history, the big fire igniter to a populist coming to power, because everyone's complaints are about the economy. And so they need someone to try and restore the nation's financial well-being. And so this Great Depression is going to give the Nazi Party the fuel that they need to rise to power. 1928, two things happen. Your Great Depression, and Hitler is going to try and seize power illegally. We've spoken about this many times. I think it's called, what's it called? I can't find its name. But essentially, Hitler is going to try and seize power illegally. He's going to get thrown in jail. And then he's going to spend some time in jail once he's tried to take power illegally. But in that time, he's pardoned, and he realizes that I can't do this illegally. I need to go through the democratic process so that I get the people on my side. So I get the nation on my side. The system, I need to work within the system, essentially. And that's where the DNVP become relevant. Because at the head of this DNVP is a guy called Hindenburg, and he sees all the losses that are being made by this conservative party. And he fears that the communists are going to win control of parliament. So what he does is he makes a deal with the Nazi Party. And at that point, most of the moderates within this conservative party had been purged, if you want to call it that. And the president is going to appoint a chancellor. He's looking for a chancellor who can restore faith in the system. And Hugenberg puts forward Hitler's name, not within his own party, but from another party, as saying, we can control this person because he's conservative. He may be on the fringes, on the far right, but we believe that we can control him. And history plays out and they don't control him. So in 1933, this moderate party is killed by we'll call it the far right. And Hitler is made chancellor, appointed chancellor by the president, but at the behest of this party. So now Hitler's in power. The chancellor is not like an arbitrary position. They've got a fair amount of power within Germany at the time, and Hitler's going to restructure government in the years succeeding. So I don't want to go into too much of the detail, but the key point in all of this is that there's two things that lead to Hitler coming to power off the back of this run-up. They've got a threat. In Hitler's mind, it's the Jews. So that's your threat. And the economy is broken. And it's this threat that are causing the economic problems in the rhetoric that's coming from this entity that's going to break everything down. So I hope I didn't go through that too fast, but the key details are there. Now we want to interpret this story through the lens of our number 3, our what's happening at the end of the world. And the model that we have for that is Revelation 17. Because it tells the story of how an entity rises to power, takes control of something, and does something to the people. Natalie, question?
Sorry, could you just go back up to that line? Did you put in the dates? You remember at the last camp meeting, there was a question about January 30th.
We'll come to that.
Okay, thank you.
So in this story, we have various entities or symbols that we want to understand. We've got the woman and the head and the beast. So who's our woman in this story?
King of the North, Hitler, is it?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Now, he has an ideology to reshape the nation being composed of people, because that's what Hitler wants access to, the people, to control the people. And based on our definition of what a head or a beast is, as a political institution with power, what's our head or beast in this story?
Was it Hindenburg? Would he be the...
So are you talking about this person?
Sorry, what did you say?
Were you referring to this person who leads the Conservative Party?
Was it Hindenburg? Is that his name? Wasn't he in charge? Give Hitler power.
So let's take a step back. So the head or the beast is your political institution with power. And without going through the steps, if we say that this is the office of the president, or the office of the ruler, in this case, what does Adolf Hitler want? Simba.
Oh,
He wants to control that office.
Mm-hmm. Natalie, do you have a comment related to that?
same.
Okay, so you see it that way. So there's the office. Now Hitler comes in and he's sitting in that chair of chancellor, and he molds that chair in his specific way, but he becomes Führer, or that's the title of that chair specifically. This is theme 2. Theme 1, we said earlier that the woman is the papacy, and the beast is? The beast in that story about the king of the north and the king of the south is? Natalie?
Mine's a question about just before.
Okay, yeah, we'll come to that. Simba?
It's Germany in theme 1.
Mm-hmm. So Germany, specifically Hitler. Hence Hitler's Pope. Theme 2, your woman is Adolf Hitler, the person. And your beast is the same. Or, if you may not be familiar with why I use the term Führer, it's basically the title that Hitler gave that chair, gave himself as he sat in the chair of the office of Chancellor, President, the head of the nation. He was, its literal definition is leader. So in this case, in Hitler's Pope, you have the Pope and you have the chair of Hitler, Führer. And in theme 2, from a different perspective now, your woman is Adolf Hitler, the person, and your beast is still that same chair, because both these entities, whether it's the papacy or Adolf Hitler, want to use that chair to accomplish their goals. Natalie, your question, which was what was before?
Yeah, I was going to ask about Fither, but you've answered it. But before that, before Hitler took the chair, Fither made it, whatever. Who was the president? Who gave that power of the state? Was it Hindenburg? I wanted to know who did it before him. I don't understand.
Wait, sorry. You said who gave that power?
Yeah.
Tell me when to stop.
I think you go back down a bit. Go down a little bit, sorry. No, maybe I've lost it now. Before Hitler took the seat of the office, the presidency, the office of the ruler, who was it before?
Can you ask your question in a different way? Because we may be speaking at crossroads. Why are you asking that question?
Can I add to the question? Sorry,
because I wanted to know who gave the power over to Hitler.
Are you asking who was the president, Natalie? Because that was my question.
Yeah.
Yes. Because he became chancellor and then he became Führer. Was Führer now? Did he rise above the office of president, but there was still a president who was kind of like name only?
So, what Hitler wants is to be chancellor.
Yeah.
At this point in this story of 1933. That's what we're interested in. Right?
I know that, but you're jumping things. In my brain, I need to know who was the president before he took that office.
So why I'm specifically trying to make this point is because I think what's at the back of your mind is that the person who appoints Hitler is the thing, the entity that gives Hitler power. Do I have that correct?
Yes.
Is that what's at the back of your mind?
Yeah.
But if we say that this chair is the head or the beast, or that becomes a beast, as a parable, the king, it's not the person that's sitting here that gives power to the woman. It's specifically this chair that gives power to the woman. So it's the chair of chancellorship that gives power to the woman, not the person who's sitting there. So it's irrelevant who's sitting there. So it's irrelevant who was president or chancellor. Okay, carry on, Natalie.
Yeah, I agree. But in my head, it was Hindenburg that was sitting on that chair, wasn't it? Thank you.
So that's why Hindenburg becomes a different part of the story. It's not Hindenburg doesn't give power to the woman or the chair, or doesn't give power to the woman. Blessing?
Yes, so what I wanted to say is best illustrated with the graphic you put, I think, just before that. That one there, yeah. That this is a representation, I think, a more accurate representation of the history that we refer to as the 1260. Because in that history, you had alternating power dynamics. Sometimes the papacy's agenda would win the day, and sometimes a king's agenda would win the day. So there's different examples, but one that I would point out to, which is an easy one for people to research on, is the rise of the Holy Roman Empire. Because the Holy Roman Empire is not the papacy. So if people would be interested in looking into that, I think it would help explain this point that Curtis made, and might even help to clear the confusion for Natalie. So there's three things. You have a king that has a social contract with the people. So the king does the job that the king is supposed to do. Then you have the church's agenda, and then you have, I'll say, the king's personal agenda. So you have those three things. When the king is fulfilling his role within the bounds of the social contract, everything's fine. And then when the papacy comes and says, you know what, we want you to do things in a certain way, the church is essentially the woman in the context of Revelation 17. Then what happened with the Holy Roman Empire, as an example, is the king decided, you know what, I'm not going to fulfill my social contract. I'm not going to listen to what the church says. I am going to declare that I am a divine ruler. And what I say is what goes. And in that case, the king became the woman, the person became the woman, using the authority or the power of the king, which I think Curtis represented as a seat to accomplish his agenda. So you have three agendas. That's how the 1260 worked. And I think what Curtis just described about the mid-20th century is consistent with that history. That's what I wanted to say.
So, putting names to what Blessing described, in 538, you have Justinian. You have the throne of Rome, and you have the papacy. And Blessing is describing is the fact that through this history, this throne has power to do certain stuff. And Justinian, when you read that, fights with the papacy often because Justinian wants his agenda sometimes, until he dies at least, and the papacy want their agenda. So, if I can call it the bad woman, historically is going to oscillate between Justinian, the person, and the papacy as an entity, because they both have this bad agenda, and they want to use this power to accomplish their agenda. And you can see this not only with Justinian, but throughout this history, that it oscillates between the two. I hope I've articulated what you were trying to describe.
Yes, Justinian's another good example. There's actually many of them.
Yeah.
Like many kings that did what Justinian did. But yeah, that's a very good example.
So we come back to what's happening in 1933. You have Hindenburg, yes, who is in reality going to be the person that puts Hitler into office. But according to Revelation 17, the thing that puts Hitler into office, or the thing that gives Hitler the power that Hitler needs, is this chair. Because without this chair that Hitler is sitting on, then Hitler means nothing. Hitler is nobody. So, we're in 1933. We've had an economic crisis that led to the rise of Hitler. Hitler is going to take government. And in my story, when I look at that, I'm going to do the following. So now this is going back to Natalie's original question. You have 1933 and July 18, 2024. And a question was asked, which Natalie re-asked, which was, Natalie, can you reword your question? Can you remind us what the question was of how you get? Yeah, carry on.
I was talking about, it was mentioned last camp meeting by someone French, Pascal, about how you can put January at 2024 because when Hitler was he Chancellor in January 30th or not? Anyway, basically, how can you line them up? Why with July 18th? I think that was my question, but I don't think I said it like that before.
That's fine. So Hitler takes government at this point in January 30th, 1933. So you have two things taking place. You have the party as well as Hitler taking government happening in the same moment in time. So the way it was drawn, at least, was you have two events. You have took party, took government, and took party. But then when I look at this history, at least, July 18, 2024, you have Trump takes party here, but we'll say November 2024, Trump takes government. Oh, I drew that wrong. So how do we get this to reconcile? So before we explore that, I just want to make sure, because we've discussed a lot. Has everyone kept track of what we're doing, what we've done so far? Just as a reminder, started off by exploring this history and the fact that this history of Nazi Germany can be looked at in one perspective based on your theme. But if you change your theme that you're looking for in the future, then that same history can be looked at in a different way, and that changes your players. In theme one, when it's King of the North versus King of the South, you have the papacy, and you have, the term I used was the Führer, the seat, the office of Germany that has power to do what the papacy wants. But then in theme two, which is Germany against itself, you have Adolf Hitler, the person who wants to accomplish something. And the thing that will give Adolf Hitler, the person, power to do that is the office of the president, the chancellorship. So that's what we did, just to show how a symbol or that line and why it can be looked at differently. And from there, now we want to understand this dilemma. So my question is, does the dilemma or the problem or apparent problem make sense? Can you see why there's an apparent problem?
It's a quick question. Sorry, I didn't put my hand up. Yes, I see the problem. I just wanted to clarify about the president. So I know that I understood everything you said about the seat and the president giving the power over, but in the original model, you said the president has the power essentially over the chancellor. So did Hitler then take that position of chancellor and break all the kind of unwritten rules to become the Führer?
Essentially. because the presidency gets merged into one in Hitler's reign.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
there's no more president, there's no more chancellor. There's this term that he has, which is Führer, which is the leader of the nation.
So what happened to the president when he did that? He was still in office essentially, or did he get kicked out and he just wasn't there anymore? I don't know.
He got kicked out.
Got kicked out. Okay.
So Hitler reshapes the whole way the government works
Right.
later down the road because of some terrorist attack and etc. But that's a story for another day.
Okay. Got you. Thanks.
Natalie?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I have the same things in my mind because we know that he died, Hindenburg died in 34, I think.
Mhm.
So that there's a big time, isn't there, from what you're talking about here? There's a year or whatever. So, like Emma said, how is he being Chancellor and presidency, taking full power when the president was still alive till 34? Do you know what I mean?
So I'm avoiding speaking about what's happening down the road because that's not what the focus is of this specific study.
Okay.
But just for clarity, in January, this thing happens in 1933. Remember, Chancellor has power to shape the nation. So Hitler's not displeased. He doesn't feel like I've missed the mark just because I'm Chancellor. In 1933, he runs for president the year before. He fails, but he knows that the Chancellor still has access to the people. And so being Chancellor is not a loss. It's not like a second grade power attempt. They have power in their own right to shape the nation. So that happens. And then in June, I think, someone sets a fire in the Reichstag in Parliament. And Hitler's going to use that terrorist attack as an excuse to reshape the government and centralize all power under him, essentially. So this 5 month or however many months it is between this and this event, the fire in Reichstag, is essentially Hitler consolidating power. This should tell us, just as a prefix, that the Sunday Law isn't the culmination of the woman's power. That they get power, but they don't have complete power at this point. They have to reshape government to get that power, which is the story of Daniel 2 and Daniel 3. But hence why I didn't want to go into that, because it's a different study. And so I'm not going to take any more questions about that. I only chose to answer it because it's a question that kept coming up. Okay. So we're here. Debbie, can you articulate what the problem is here in your own words? I just want to know if I've expressed it well enough.
I hear
If you
you,
can't,
but
that's fine.
yeah, I don't know how to. So what are you saying about the January 33, the whole thing?
So what happens with Hitler in January 30, 1933?
Yeah, I don't remember that one. Yeah, somebody else. That
Mm-hmm.
one. Sorry.
No, that's fine. No, that's okay. Let's see. Melania, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
So what, in your words, if you can,
Mhm.
describe what the issue is here when I take this history and I line it up with this history.
Okay, so in the first line, Hitler in January 30, 1933, he did two things at once, like took the party and took the government. But on the second line now, these two events, they are happening it's the same thing, but happening at different dates. So it took the party first in July 2024, then the government later on in November. So like this is the issue of time.
So it's, how does this modeling even work? Surely that should invalidate me being able to do this. That's the issue, essentially.
Yes.
So, okay. So now that we're all on the same page, we'll use a term that we use. My apology, but my defense is how we look at prophecy. So prophets use history in an interesting way. When you look at Daniel, or you look at Jesus, or you look at John and how they relate to history, it can be confusing, but it's meant to help us. And the thing that's confusing is when you go to your number 3, when you pick up a line of prophecy and you're going to do line upon line, you as the student, us as the students, need to ask the right questions. Because if we ask the wrong questions, we're going to get the wrong answers. So what I mean by that is, if we're going to take 2 lines of history and we're being controlled by our theme from number 3, we need to be certain about what the thing is that we're comparing when we bring those lines together. So when I look at this story and I'm thinking of my theme, it's not who comes into public office that day. It's how this woman gets into office. What's the thing that gives them legitimacy? And what prophets do, whether it's Daniel, whether it's Jesus, is I'll use the term, use time compression. They compress time in a way to try and let us, the readers, understand what this theme is in a very specific way. So if you read through the Exodus story, we know that Exodus motif, if you want to call it that, gets repeated throughout the Bible, this idea of captivity, deliverance, etc. But this repeating pattern doesn't always happen on the same schedules. They happen in time compressed manners, sometimes expanded, sometimes all clumped together at one. And so in Isaiah 46, I think it's verse 10, God is going to tell us about the beginning and the end. And when we read that verse, that God tells us what's going to happen from the beginning, in that context, there's a prophecy that's going to be told about what's going to happen at the end. And we look at that verse and we change it from a prophecy and we turn it to an event. So an event happens at the beginning, which is going to tell us what happens at the end. So the first time, when Isaiah means it, it's a prophecy. There was this prophecy that was told at the beginning, and this God tells us what's going to happen all the way back from the beginning. We as a movement change that into methodology, into an event that happens at the beginning that's going to tell us what's going to happen at the end. So a case where a prophecy or a prophet uses this technique, time compression, is one that we should all be familiar with, I think, which is Jesus talking to the disciples when they're coming down from Olivet and they're looking at the temple. I'm going to put some quotes in the chat. We have Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, all telling this story about Jerusalem, etc., etc., etc. Can I get a reader to read this? Quote. Okay, I'll read it just for time's sake. So Ellen White commenting about what's happening when they're coming down from Olivet and the disciples look at the temple and Jesus predicts its destruction. In talking about the disciples' reaction when Jesus says that. The disciples were unable to understand Christ's words with reference to the temple. They called his attention to its massive stones, saying, "Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here? The stones of the temple were of the purest marble," etc., etc. They could not understand words which doomed to destruction the walls that had stood forever. Their minds were vague, and it was difficult for the Lord to make his lessons intelligible to them. So the disciples are going to hear Jesus say that the temple is going to be destroyed, this marvelous building, and for them, they're shocked. They are surprised, and the reason they're surprised or in disbelief is because they've merged two events in their minds. They've merged the destruction of Jerusalem, or this temple, and the end of the world into two things. So they've got these two events, and in their minds, they all just equal the singular point in time. So they compress times in their minds, in the disciples' minds. And Jesus' response is in Desire of Ages 628, paragraph 1. Oh, I can't send it fully. So Christ is going to play to their preconceived ideas, or to try and help them in a way that Christ sees fit. So Christ talking to this large number of people, the disciples come to him privately, and Jesus is now going to answer their question. They say to Jesus, "Tell us, when are these things going to happen? And what shall be the sign of their coming at the end of the world?" So when is the destruction of Jerusalem and when's the end of the world? Because in the disciples' mind, it's all happening at the same time. And reading from Desire of Ages 628, paragraph 1. Jesus did not answer his disciples by taking up separately the destruction of Jerusalem and the great day of his coming. He mingled the description of these two events. Had he opened to his disciples' future events as he beheld them, they would have been unable to endure the sight. In mercy to them, he blended the description of the two great crises, leaving the disciples to study out the meaning for themselves, and etc., etc. So Jesus, the disciples have this preconceived idea. And so Jesus, standing at the beginning, is going to give a prophecy about the end. And Ellen White, in that paragraph, says there's two reasons why Jesus does this. Out of mercy, because of their preconceived ideas, and to make a point. She doesn't say it this way, but you can see that Jesus is using this as an opportunity to show methodology. The methodology being history repeats. Well, Jesus is going to now tell about the destruction of Jerusalem, the Dark Ages, the Millerite history, the end of the world, etc., all in one singular repeating history. So there's two reasons Jesus does this: show methodology and out of mercy to them. So at the beginning and at the end, you have a prophecy, and Jesus is going to blend events. But when we come to the end, we know that the line of history that is the fulfillment of that prophecy are several events. They're all separated. Let's pause here for a second. Do we see that that's what Jesus is doing? That Jesus is at the beginning, tells a prophecy, compresses events that at the end are going to happen separately. When Jesus is talking to the disciples and they're confused about the destruction of Jerusalem. Does anyone have any questions about what Jesus is doing then? It should all be a passage that we're familiar with. If you don't say, I'm just going to pick on a random person and ask you to explain it in your words. So rather, you say now. Titus, that discourse that's happening between Jesus and the disciples, what's happening? What's taking place then?
Happy Sabbath. I'm not sure if this will be correct that Christ, because the disciples have a limited information, like they have one worldview, and Christ tries to give them a description of what they understand and then move to another event, which seems similar to that. So from Jerusalem, the destruction of Jerusalem by pagans, to another event, which is similar, destruction of the church by papalism. Yeah.
Okay. So disciples have something in their minds. Jesus, because Jesus wants to help them, just compresses everything in his prophecy. But in reality, the prophecy is distinct events. That's what I think you said. Or at least that's what I was saying. So here's Jesus with the prophecy at the beginning. And what we have now is history. And we have the same thing taking place. At the beginning, we have a prophecy. And that prophecy is Hitler. And all these things are going to be compressed. Where at the end, Trump's rise and him, we'll just say party, and power are two separate events. So why do this? So Jesus has his reasons for compressing these events, but based on what we've described, how would you articulate why history would blend these events when they're separate events, using what we've seen Jesus do? Blessing, does anything come to your mind?
No, I'm thinking.
Come again with your question, Curtis, please.
So here we have Jesus, who's going to give a prophecy about the end. And in Jesus's prophecy, the events that Jesus is going to speak about, he's going to compress them all into, make it look like it's all one singular thing. But the reality is, at the end, you see that the destruction of Jerusalem happens here, the 1260 happens here, Millerite history happens here, and end of world happens here. They all happen at different times spread out. But when Jesus answered the disciples, it all looked like he answered in a way where it's all happening here. All of them are blended into one way mark. Do you get that part, Simba?
Yes.
So here, the prophecy is a line of history. And in this line of history, these things are happening at the same time. Hitler taking control of the party and the country. But the end looks different. Instead now, these events are spread out. You have the party and the country. And so my question was, yeah, we said Jesus did that out of mercy because the disciples wouldn't have been able to bear the full picture. And number one. And the second reason is Jesus wants to show the repeat of history, wants to show methodology at play, of how you use methodology in these repeating patterns. So now my question is, that's why Jesus did it. Why do we have this prophecy at the beginning, Hitler's rise to power, being compressed, where at the end they're separated? What would be a reason for that to be the case? Simba, does my question make sense now?
Yes.
It makes sense. Probably it could be an issue of methodology as well, just like in the first line.
Can you elaborate on the methodology bit?
Okay. So, like we have seen on the first line, the first one, the first one here, all the prophetic events are being blended into one. But on the second one, we are seeing the repeating of history. Like what has happened is showing that God is showing the end from the beginning. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the history is repeating itself. Like if you see the history of the destruction of Jerusalem, if you line it up with the 1260, it's more like the same history, and even the Millerite history and the end of the world. The theme is the same, but it is being explained in different perspectives.
So from the methodology perspective, Jesus wants to show that there's something related to the end of the world that's related to the destruction of Jerusalem. And you disciples, or we as students, need to understand that. So Ellen White will phrase it as, in mercy to them, the disciples, Jesus blends the description of these two great crises, 70 AD and the end of the world, leaving the disciples to study out the meaning for themselves. So it was the disciples' duty to see these things as a repeat of history, as to find the theme, the underlying pattern that teaches you about the end of the world from 70 AD, but to separate them as well. But Jesus wanted the disciples to figure that out, to figure out this repeating pattern. And that's what Jesus is doing with their parables all the time. So we come to this, and Melania said that methodologically, if we have these two things blended, country and party, what should we learn from that? Because we should have learned something by looking at 1933 in this way. We should have learned something that would have taught us something about here. In the same way that the disciples should have learned something when Jesus does this. So my suggestion is that without going to the story or the study of adultery and fornication and etc., if we had recognized that what this history is doing is the same thing about what Jesus was doing, then we should have been able to see this repeating pattern. Of where the problem starts. So without going to Matthew, I think it's 5, verse 28, or Revelation 17, verse 2, to demonstrate that the sin starts with flirting, and you have consummation, that this is all just one sin. It's all the same sin, and where we should be looking is here. Without going there, we should have been able to go to the story of Nazi Germany, where all that is happening at the same time, to demonstrate that, as the history left us, the disciples, to study out this meaning for ourselves. They're blended to teach us this concept without going explicitly to Matthew 5, verse 28, or Revelation 17, verse 2, or etc., etc. Does that make sense? I don't know whose hand went up first. So I'll just go Natalie, then Blessing.
I hope it's okay to say at this point, I like what you just did. Are you saying that, can I ask you if you feel we've still got a democracy in the form of elections, especially coming up to midterms?
Yes.
And the same, obviously, for the election 2028. You still think it's legal democracy elections?
I can't speak for the future, but I can speak for the past and the present.
You just spoke to 2026 midterms. Future.
I never said 2026.
I said 2026 and you said yeah.
No, I was talking about the democracy that just played out. I thought your question was about the most recent election.
And the present. We've got democracy.
At present, yes.
The only reason I asked that is because the transition when Hitler became Führer, or however you say that, leader, that was complete control, which was kind of like a totalitarian regime. It was, which we are not seeing today, because like you've just said, we've still got a democracy. And you put that at January the 30th, 33, which is the Sunday law, and yours, but it doesn't go with what happened there, because we don't see that in the USA, because you're saying we still have a democracy, a legal democracy, not a totalitarian.
So 1933
was legal.
January 2024, July 18. That's what I lined up. This was legal. So if the way Hitler rose to power was all legal, it was all democratic. And the thing that it lines up with, I'm suggesting, is legal and democratic as well. I haven't spoken to anything that Hitler does thereafter, because this is the theme or the focus of this study.
But you said government and party in the same way Hitler's time and our time. Taking the party and the government is basically the country. And to take the country, you have to become a totalitarian state, however way you say that, I would think. And when you look at history of Hitler, that only happened when Hindenburg died, which was a year later from 33. Then when he took control of the military, he put in laws. I know that's noise and you're not looking for that. But it just, for me, something's not clicking in the sense.
When we say take the country, when we say take the country or the government, what we're referring to is becoming the leader of that country, so chancellorship. So the way he took that country in January 30, 1933 was him becoming chancellor. That's what we're talking about, or what I'm talking about when I say take the country in 1933, January 30th. Taking the party is his control over the Nazi Party's control over the DNVP, the Conservative Center-Right Party. That's the way I'm using those terms. If you want to use it differently, that's separate.
What did you say the government was then? What was your term of that? When he takes the government, what did that mean?
Him becoming chancellor.
Which just means he's not a dictator, he's just took the government, the seat of the...
Yeah, he's become a leader in government.
Thank you.
Okay. Blessing.
No, it's all right. We can continue.
It may be important.
No, it's okay. I think I'll need to think it through a bit more.
Okay. Was it related to this?
It was related to that and what Jesus did. Yeah, because the thing is, if I say it, you'll be like, please elaborate, and I will not be in a position to do so.
Okay, no problem. So point number one that at least I'm suggesting is that Jesus compresses events to show a repeating pattern, to show how methodology works, because Jesus is saying that you want to learn something about the end of the world, look at the destruction of Jerusalem, and you lay them side by over each other. And so my suggestion was, when we look at the story of Hitler's rise to power and him becoming chancellor and him taking over control of the party happen at the same point in time, because historically they both happen in January of 1933, they're happening concurrently. My suggestion is that prophecy is being compressed to teach us something about those two events and how they're connected. So when we come to the end of the world, and months after we initially start exploring this topic of Hitler in 1933, I'll say in September, October 2025, and we bring in the story of adultery from Matthew 5 verse 28 to demonstrate that this sin that the kings do starts all the way back from flirting, and consummation is just the same thing, just on a spectrum. My suggestion is we should have been able to get that by looking at what's happening in the prophecy, just as Jesus left it to the disciples to study out the meaning of decompression themselves. So that's number one. And then number two is Jesus did it out of mercy for the disciples. And so my second suggestion is, by having this compressed into one event, I'll say the prophecy, the story of Hitler, does it out of mercy for us, because we couldn't comprehend how the rise and fall of a nation could be when someone is not in office. It wouldn't have made sense to us. It doesn't make sense to us even now, but out of mercy, this prophecy combines it all into one singular event to help us and our preconceived ideas. So in the same two motifs that Jesus does what he does, my suggestion is this prophecy does it for the same reasons, just in different ways. And sure, we can now go and explore adultery and fornication and etc. to unpackage everything, but I'm suggesting we should have been able to see it the first time. And hence my apology and defense. Natalie, you had a question.
Sorry, I'm using this opportunity with you teaching because I don't know when you'll be back here. So I'm using this to get my head clear.
Okay, wait. Sorry, is it on this specific thing that we just said, or on a different thing? Just so I can put a line.
This one.
Okay, go.
I wasn't listening when you were talking about the compression of Jesus because my mind was still trying to figure out other things that you did like 5 minutes before. So are you saying that when Jesus compressed it for those disciples, in the same sense, not talking about Hitler because Hitler did the same, but in your application, in Jesus' application, wasn't he talking about now, the present, number 2, when we do 1, 2, 3? No, and he was talking about 3 as well. But in your application, you're talking about the present, and you're also, but you're not really talking about 3 in the sense that, because you're saying the government means a different thing than what it did by taking the whole country in a dictatorship, totalitarian way. Am I correct in that thinking? I don't know.
You've said a lot of things, so let's just go step by step. So Jesus is standing here, right, at the beginning, and Jesus is going to give a prophecy. And Jesus' prophecy is about number 3. It's always about number 3. Number 1 always points to number 3, which is the future.
Can I just ask you, that was about the disruption, 70 AD, disruption of the end of the world, or not? Number 3, Jesus was talking about.
Yes. So that's going to.
But you
so
weren't
what
talking
he's.
about that. You weren't talking about that. That's my
So
confusion.
what Jesus? Yeah. So Jesus is doing this 70 end of the world. That's what Jesus is talking about. Yes. Natalie, do you agree?
Yes.
And Jesus collapses them all into one thing when he gives the prophecy at the beginning.
Yeah.
Hitler is going to collapse the chancellorship or control of the country leader. Let's just say country leader.
It's chancellor and presidency brings them together.
That's not what I'm talking about. Because that January 1933 is not when the presidency is brought in. Chancellorship is leader of the country. If you just put president aside for now, chancellor is leader of the country in its own right, just factually. If you read about how German politics worked, being chancellor meant that you were a leader of the country. And in the same month, to do that, he needed to kill the DMVP. So those 2 events happen at the same time, that the gatekeeper is removed and Hitler becomes the leader of the country. The reality today is that these 2 things happen at different points. That's what I was saying. So, Natalie?
Yeah, and I know you were saying that, but when you put July and November there, November, yes, Trump takes the seat, but it's not close of probation like 70 AD.
I'm not trying to line these up. I'm not lining these up in that way. I'm looking at a principle. The reason why I went to this history is to look at a methodology. I'm not saying that these 2 things are line upon line. I'm looking at how prophets use methodology.
Okay.
Emma.
So just trying to summarize what you've said, if it's correct, that you've shown how Jesus combined those 4 events you said in mercy to disciples and for methodology, so that they would go away and study those things and see what the connection is between those 4 things, understand more about it, more about destruction of Jerusalem, more about the end of the world. And in the same way, when we saw two things there at Hitler. We should have recognized that it's not just about him taking the country, that the way he did that was to take the party, and that's significant, and we should have seen that. And so it showed us more about our history. And I guess for me, reaffirming or confirming that we're correct, that the taking over of the party is a significant event, and it has a part to play in prophecy that we underestimated. And I think that it's also significant because it's attached to the idea of the fact that we thought it was about the people voting. That's a separate argument, perhaps. That's not what you said. So it's to see the significance of the fact that taking over the party is more important than taking the country, because that's how the country gets taken. That's how the democracy goes from a democracy to a dictatorship. That's how this process happens. Is that correct? And that's key to us, because we've got a wrong idea of how countries rise and fall, and of whole Sunday law concept and what happens there and who's being tested and all that, those details. So we have to go back and see now that this is about the party and the government and how it gets taken over.
So it all starts with the preconceived idea of the student of prophecy. For the disciples, their preconceived idea is that 70 AD equals end of world. And so Jesus plays on their preconceived idea to teach them something. He uses their preconceived idea to teach them something else that Jesus wants to teach them. That's important. That's the reality of the thing. So for us, as you articulated, the preconceived idea is, is what, Emma? What's the preconceived idea? You just said it. What's our preconceived idea?
Was that the significant event is the taking over of the country. For a dictator to come to power, the significant event is taking over the country, is getting the role of presidency, I guess, which we associated with being elected in. But
so we have this preconceived idea, and what the prophet is going to do here at the beginning, by prophet I mean the line of prophecy, is, okay, fine, that's your preconceived idea. So here is the thing that you're interested in, taking over the country, but I'm going to attach it to something that you should look for to play to your preconceived ideas. But then your duty now is to unpack this thing over here to demonstrate the thing that I actually want you to see, want you to learn. And that's where we come to this. So yeah, what you just said, I've just added more details to the board work.
Yeah, good.
Blessing.
Yeah, so I've just decided to say it. So my point had to do with the preconceived idea bit. I guess Elder Emma and yourself have kind of spoken to it. Because if you look at the disciples' wrong idea, let me not say wrong entirely, because it was given to them. It's not like they made it up. So they read the Old Testament, and the Old Testament had given them this concept or idea that Jerusalem would stand forever. So the destruction of Jerusalem for them was synonymous with the end of the world, because it was inconceivable that Jerusalem would be destroyed and life would continue on this earth without Jerusalem as the political center of God's people. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, Jesus speaks to them knowing the way they think, and he has to, I'll say, cleverly get them out of that situation, which takes skill and time. And for us, we have a similar thing where we have been conditioned to look at the end of the world from the lens of Ellen G. White. Ellen G. White gives us a version of how the end of the world will be. And part of that is the Sunday law is a national phenomena. And because of that, we could never see something like a party election, which is not even half of the country, really. It's a very small portion of the country, because even with the primary elections that determine the candidate that will run for presidency, most people that participate are in the minority of the party. And to take that and say, this is the event, is at odds with our concept of a Sunday law that we had been given by Ellen White. So we saw it as a national phenomena, and this is meant to challenge that. It's not about the nation or the people, I think Elder Emma said, but there is something more fundamental to that. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
And so we're given a prophecy. So if we just think of, in this case, it's literally a prophet standing up and prophesying. But in this case, it's an event that, as you've articulated, the prophet, this event, is meant to cleverly use the preconceived idea that we have about nationality, or not nationality, a nationwide phenomena, to teach us something about something we wouldn't be looking for in the first place. And so this comes into the picture of the parties and how that translates to this wider thing that we should be expecting. So what would have been disastrous is if the disciples walk away from this conversation and they take nothing away from it. They don't do what Ellen White suggested, is trying to understand what Jesus is trying to teach them, and still walk away with the idea that, oh yeah, Jesus confirmed what I had in mind, that 70 AD is the end of the world. And so what we should have done is look at this and say, oh no, okay, that confirms the fact that taking control of the party and the country all happen at the same time, either in November or January. What we should have done, like what the disciples should have done, is unpackage those things to try and see the parable that Jesus was teaching, or the parable that Hitler was teaching. Titus, we're way over time, so this is the last one.
I just wanted to say what you said, and maybe if we consider even that history leading to Jerusalem, what Christ was saying at that point was that temple is already destroyed, because the disciples are seeing the temple, it is standing and it is beautiful. For Jesus, it's over, because it's after a triumphal entry. And for Christ, that house, it's already over. That destruction, it has the destruction of that institution it's over. But for the disciples, they can't still see that. They want to see visible evidence where the temple itself is destroyed. And I don't know if that will also relate to we want the whole Trump to take the whole country to mark that event. Yeah, because I think it's also related to why they can't see the other event, which is the 1260. Yeah.
So I wasn't going to read this, but because Titus brought it up, and because of the question that Natalie asked about what I'm doing here when I bring 70 AD as the end of the world. The close of probation and the Sunday law are really difficult events to distinguish in prophecy, because they have so many similar characteristics, and so symbols can refer to both of them depending on how you're going to look at them. A classic example of that is 538. In one story, 538 is equal to the Sunday law, and in another story, 538 is equal to the close of probation. So it may seem irrelevant, or it may seem like a disjointed comparison to bring 70 AD and talk about it in the context of the Sunday law. But in the next paragraph of Desire of Ages, 6:28, paragraph 2, Jesus turns to the disciples and says, "Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many." And then she explains how many false messiahs were rising up. And at the end, she says, "But this warning was given also to those who live in this age of the world. The same deceptions practiced prior to the destruction of Jerusalem have been practiced throughout ages and will be practiced again." We should be aware, and it takes multiple steps to demonstrate this. But
Curtis, sorry.
Yeah,
You're aware,
Yeah.
but maybe take 5 minutes max.
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm done. I'm done. That the Sunday law is all about this idea of a false Messiah rising up. And so this interaction between the disciples and Jesus is not as irrelevant as we may think when talking about the Sunday law. So we'll close in prayer on that note.
I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean by that.
The key takeaway is that 70 AD, the close of probation, 538, depending on what perspective you're going to take, is going to mean the Sunday law, but it's going to mean the close of probation.
Yeah, I understand a bit what you meant.
Okay.
I don't understand the Sunday law, the King of the North, Messiah, false Messiah, and how that's related to close of probation, Daniel 12:1, 70 AD.
We can discuss it offline.
Okay. Thank you, Curtis. Great study.
Let's close in prayer. Dear God, thank you for the day. Thank you for the Sabbath. Thank you for each of the times that you've availed to us to learn more about how you work and the mercy that you show us. I pray and ask that as we continue to study the various elements of the end of the world, it may become clear to us why you work the way you do. And in reality, the way you work is packaged in a lot of mercy. And I'm grateful for that. And I pray that in that mercy, we may not become naive to that mercy, but may dig into the reasons why you choose to operate the way you do and why history unfolds the way you do. And so I ask that you may be with us through the rest of the Sabbath in all things. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.